The two workmen from yesterday turned up again this morning, this time joined by a third colleague. The task for today was to make the house waterproof before the Christmas break, and the question, in view of the poor weather forecast for the day, was whether they'd be able to do that, as well as catch up on what was left over from yesterday. The job wasn't as simple as it sounds. Covering the roof with the waterproof plastic sheeting that they began to fit yesterday was only part of it, because if it wasn't then securely fixed down, it would take hardly any wind at all to get under it and rip the whole lot off in seconds. So they also had to get on some or all of the wooden battens that will eventually support the roof tiles to secure the plastic. The weather turned out to be kinder to them today than yesterday. Ironically, whereas the day before it had rained almost without stopping, soaking them through, today they persuaded their employer to supply them with waterproofs that they didn't need. Having a team of 3 helped to speed things up. 2 could be working on the roof, while the third ran the materials up that they needed, and they got the whole roof finished and fully battened, ready for tiling, by lunchtime. There were still some things to be finished off after the holiday, but at least the roof was now covered, and although the rain continued on and off and into the evening, only some of it found its way inside the house. And more importantly, the wooden roof trusses could now begin to slowly dry out. With the roof covered, there was no work planned for the following day, or indeed until after the New Year. When I dropped into the house the following day, I was dismayed to find that despite the roof being covered, there was an enormous amount of water inside, which took me over 3 hours to remove, as otherwise it would have taken days or even weeks to have dried out. Over the Christmas holiday, I had a chance to inspect the roof work that had been done before the break, and I soon noticed things that caused me concern. The first was that on approaching the back of the house, the join between the roof sections was some way off the joint in the angle of the walls. So I then took a look at the roof overhangs in the front and back of the house. The overhang along the front of the house was the same width from the living room end to the far corner of bedroom 2. I then checked the overhang along the back. The first and most obvious thing was that the roof at the living room end of the house was not positioned centrally on the peak of the gable end, with the ridge having been moved forward several centimetres. This was highlighted in the last video, and was a result of incorrectly positioning the very first roof truss that had been installed, which no one had noticed at the time. The error was confirmed when I checked the roof overhang on the rear of the living room and found it not only to be almost non-existent at the gable end, but also narrower at that end than at the other. I also noticed that because of the roof being out of position, there were gaps between the roof ends and the tops of the gables. This was unacceptable, and I sent an email to the builder expressing my displeasure. I received a reply saying that the manager responsible was on holiday in the south of France, but that another representative from the company would be available for a meeting on site the following Saturday. This got off to a bad start, because he tried to insist on my accepting what had been done. I was unwilling to do that, and told him that while I'd been waiting, I'd retrieved a soaking wet sheet of paper from the waste bin that was actually the roof fabrication plan that the roofers had used. This showed that the faulty overhang was actually as per the builder's own plan, and that I had not been previously notified of it. I already knew that there was an issue due to the gable ends of my house being of unequal widths, with the living room end being 12 centimetres wider than the bedroom end. He said that the builder had had to change my plan because of the dimension difference, and that this had been discussed with me in October 2021, more than a year before. He said that a choice had had to be made between having the shorter overhang over the kitchen living room end or a larger overhang below the length of roof over the bedrooms in the rear of the house. I refuted that such a conversation had ever taken place. I said that even if it had done, there had been over a year between then and the date when the joists had been fabricated, more than enough time for the plan to have been referred to me as it should have been. We did come to a compromise decision by the end of the meeting, but I was still unhappy. The builder had cut the joists according to the shorter gable end, which made them too short to span the other wider end of the house. If he had done the opposite, the ridge and overhang issues at the wider living room end, where they were now highly visible, would not have existed at all, and the anomaly would have been at the far bedroom end and towards the rear, where nobody would ever have noticed. I therefore sent off another email and left a message saying that despite what had been agreed at the meeting, there was to be no further work on the roof until we had met on site with the builder's clerk of works to discuss the way forward. And that's how things were left running into the new year. They would inevitably result in further delay, but it will be better to resolve such matters at the time rather than forging ahead, as this would certainly result in further cost for whoever was responsible for rectifying the error.